All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hi, guys. We have quite a number of people on the line now. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Olayinka Majekodunmi. I'm the country manager for Nexford in Nigeria. It's a pleasure to have all of you on the line. Thank you so much for joining. This is number 2 and a very exciting webinar in our series of webinars during this period. We're excited to have the man of the hour, Olayinka Majekodunmi, who is a top shot consultant at McKinsey Co. Thanks, Olayinka, for joining us today. I will do your introductions and tell everyone just about you in just a moment. So as we are going through the slides, I'll just do some introductions on Nexford. I'll remind everyone why we're here, and then I will hand over to you fully to take us through the business case.
Thank you, Alamido, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Can you switch to the next slide so I can? All right, so just reminding everyone that Nexford is a 100% online licensed and accredited American university. Our goal is to be the largest, most affordable American university in the world. And we're on track to do so with learners from over 50 different countries around the world. Nigeria is a very key area for us. We're very keen on education development here. And we're doing all we can to support our learners in all the different ways that we can. Economic mobility is also very important to us. And so we want to place our learners in very real life scenarios that will prepare them for the workplace. And this is along the lines of doing that as well in terms of having real life business cases, meeting, engaging and networking with industry leaders and really preparing you for the global world, even outside of the academic realms. So we're doing our best with that. And we want to use this opportunity while everyone is at home, in the lockdowns and in your various homes and all of that, to really engage the online community a bit more and allow our learners and the broader community to gain more insights from industry leaders across. So again, thank you, Olayinka, for joining us. Can we go to the next slide and then shortly after the following one? So I'll just go through the agenda real quick. As I'm doing my introductions, only take but a few minutes, and then I will introduce Olayinka, and then thereafter he will take us through a real life business case. I believe one that he's worked on himself, so it's very exciting. And thereafter we can, depending on how Olayinka wants to do it, we'll take questions as we go, or we'll wait till the end to answer more in-depth questions. Your questions can be of any range, right? So you can ask questions concerning the case, concerning Olayinka's experience, because he's highly experienced and has worked in various industries in sub-Saharan Africa, really supporting his clients in different ways. So he has a world of experience that you can definitely learn from. So ask your questions concerning the case, concerning Olayinka's background, experience, if you want career tips and whatnot. There's no limit to what kinds of questions you can ask. And then towards the end, I have a small surprise that we'd like to announce, as well as the upcoming webinars that you can participate in. So the next slide is introducing our speaker himself. Okay, and a little bit more about Olayinka. So for those who don't, let me tell you my small story about McKinsey and Company. So a couple years back, this was the one company that I wanted to work at. If there's any company in the world, this was it. McKinsey Co is, for those who know it and are familiar with it, it's the #1 consulting firm in the world. They really do take pride in supporting their clients all over the world with solving problems. Their chairman, exactly, for instance, at solving corporate problems. And so Olayinka is an engagement manager at McKinsey. I believe he's been there upwards of 6 years or so. So in that time, he's been able to support different clients in sub-Saharan Africa in terms of strategy and operations, performance improvements, and really solving problems that really go in depth in the different various industries. So healthcare, consumer goods, private equity, so on and so forth. He's also worked at Procter & Gamble prior to being at McKinsey, so he does have some corporate experience there as well. And he's also a founder. Okay, so if Olayinka can also tell us a little bit more about his entrepreneurial exploits there as well. So without further ado, Olayinka, thank you so much for taking the time out of a very busy schedule to be with us today and to allow us learn from you. Really appreciate you being here, and I will hand over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Olamido, and it's really a pleasure to be here today. I think before we go into details on what we want to achieve, right, I think I'll start by saying thank you to the Nexford team. I think it's amazing work that the team is doing over there. And also thank you to Olamido. I remember when we first met, right, and we share the same surname, but we actually, and well, we're long distant cousins. I'm not sure what the family tree looks like that connects us. But I think it's always a pleasure to catch up and to chat with you, Olamido. Great. So I think maybe before we dive in, right, I'll just take the first 5 minutes while I walk through the agenda to open the Q&A and just ask people what your expectations are, right? So we say this session is focused on an Africa case study, solving a very relevant problem. But I think just to get a feel from the audience in terms of what you expect today, I think it would be great if you just drop your expectations in the Q&A box, just to also help me understand how best to guide the conversation. Cool. So while we wait for that, right, I think 3 things that I'm hoping to get out of this, right, and also I'm also hoping the audience intends to get out of this is, let's just talk about solving problems, right? I think we will all agree that problem solving is part of everyday life, right? In terms of what to wear when you're trying to get dressed in the morning, when you're trying to take a beverage in the morning, tea, coffee, water, oranges, right? Subconsciously or consciously, we're always solving problems every day, right? So I think today is, let's just get a little bit scientific or methodological in terms of how we think about problem solving, right? By learning some tried and tested principles that kind of apply to almost always all situations that we might find ourselves. And then while we do that, right, and I also share some tools and tips, and most important thing is that we have fun and it's as interactive as we can, given the context of the session. Great. So I have some notes here, right, in terms of expectations. So I'll just read it out. And that does this then, in a way, form our guiding principles as we start off. And then the plan will be, once we are done, we circle back here to see if we met most of the expectations during the discuss, or if there are some things that were left out. So that sounds like a plan. The first thing here is I want to have first-hand knowledge of solving big problems for a global business. Okay. The second one here says, what particular Africa business case are we studying? We'll find out shortly. There's a case on the next 2 slides. There's one here that says, I hope to gain a practical knowledge of how to frame business problems in a systematic manner that makes the solutions easy to find. I like that. Another one here says, hi Olayinka, I expect a scenario playing session on Africa case studies as you deem fit to share. Okay. Someone here says, I would love to learn to include the use of case studies in handling sessions that I facilitate. So I'm hoping to learn a lot and to have fun, of course. Cool. Yeah, so I think just reading the expectations, right? I think there's a theme around, one is more like what's an approach, right, that works to problem solving. There's another theme here around just a systematic approach. there's one of the comments I like here around big problems, right? So will an approach differ depending on the weights or the complexity of the problem? And then the last one here around how one can look inwards, right, to solve complex problems. Cool. So I'll pause here, and then we can dive right in, and then we circle back to see what the learnings are once we are done. To get us started, right, I want to introduce four levers or four elements of a process that I'm sure a number of people have heard, have seen, because it's taught in business school. It's different companies, it's different elements of this, but it's an approach that's generally and broadly folks agree that it works to solve most complex problems, right? So for the sake of this discourse, let's call it the 4-step problem solving process, right? And we're going to spend the rest of the time, right, the next 20 minutes, just walking you through what the 4 steps look like in the context of a problem, right, a corporate problem. The first step typically is, before you go about solving problems, right, it's important to really understand, what are you solving, right? So hypothetically, right, let's say you get to your house, and then for a parent, the child says, "Mom, Dad, the AC is not working." Right, that could mean a ton of things, right? It could mean that there's no power in the old neighborhood, right? It could mean that there's no power in the house. It could mean that there's power, but the AC is not coming on. It could mean that there's power, this is not coming on because someone switched off the remote. It could mean a whole host of things, right? So it's very important when trying to solve a problem to be very clear on what the problem definition is. What exactly are you solving for? And then once that is done, right, the next thing is then around structuring the problem. I think one thing, if I was going to use the AC example, is that everything in a way has subcomponents, right? So when you look at an air conditioning, typically there are components to it. There's an indoor unit and outdoor units. When you look at the indoor unit, there are components to it, right? And that's also a way to think about every problem, right? The problem is only made up of subparts that accumulate into the overarching issue at hand. And then once that is done, right, we then will spend some time thinking about how do you get to solutions, right? So there's something around the prioritization and just analyzing the available information. And then there's the final bit around how do you piece it all together to come with very concrete, actionable solutions that could then lead to the impact that is desired. So that's what we'll be spending the rest of the time doing. So, to one of the expectations, right? There was a question around what case we will be looking at today. I think today, because of a couple of reasons, right? So I'm based in Nigeria. There's been a lot of conversations by the government around deepening financial inclusion. So I thought, okay, let's do something centered around financial inclusion, right? We also know that the fintech industry in Nigeria and Africa overall is growing, right? And one of the drivers of the fintech industry is also linked to the financial inclusion drive to find much more cost-efficient ways to get people into the financial system. So let's keep that in mind, right? And let's assume that today we're working with the CEO of a fintech company that offer basic financial services around cash in, cash out transactions, bill payment, probably offer a little bit of thrift collection, what is typically called the Ajo Isusu in Nigeria, and just a host of portfolio that's aimed at reaching the unbanked population or the informal community and trying to get them into the formal financial system. Now, and let's assume that every member of my audience, right, is a consultant or a consultant expert. The client has called you, right, and the context is that revenues from transactions, right, have been declining, right, over the last 1 year. And the CEO is worried as to why the revenues from transactions are shrinking, right? And he's basically said, hey, you know what, can you, Mr. Consultant, help figure out what's going on here, right? And specifically the CEO has told you, I'm bringing you on board. I want you to help reverse the trend of declining in transaction revenue. More importantly is I want the share of transaction revenue to double, right? Over the next 1 year from 20% to 40% of my total revenues by the end of 2021. So that's the brief from the CEO, and that's the problem at hand. I think what we're then gonna do here, right, is then we're gonna wear the consulting hat and say, okay, if this is the problem, or where the problem solving, to say, if this is the CEO's problem, what can we do to really help him achieve his aspiration? Cool. So I think while I go on, I'll go face by face, right? So when we talk about the problem definition, I'll take a quick 2-3 minutes pause to get feedback and just get folks to ask questions. And then we use that approach till we go through the four steps of problem solving. So the first thing is, how would you define the problem, right? And I think this is very important, right? Because the definition of the problem will, to a large extent, impact how we think about the solution to the problem, right? So for example, the CEO has laid the context, right? Transaction revenues are declining, but there's some context that is required, right, to be able to solve that problem. Because what if there's an overall industry context, right, where the regulator, for example, has placed a ban on some elements of transactions, right, and say, you know what, as far as the government is concerned, every cash in, cash out transaction will be free, right? So basically, it's basically a market that's disappearing because of regulation, right? I think that's a very good context, right? Because if that is the issue, right, it basically means that the CEO's challenge, like there's very little you can do because the solution there is to a large extent, right, out of scope for what you can immediately influence or what's within the influence of the CEO. Versus where it's more of a competition play, right, where it just appears as though competition is gaining market share, probably because there are deficiencies or gaps in the services, or the competition is more reliable, or they have better price points, right? So that's good context. So it's important as you think about the problem at hand to not just dive to trying to solve it, but to try to understand what's the context behind this problem, right? Because it then helps to really fine tune and hone into what really matters. The second thing around key elements, right, to ensure that you have the best problem definition, right, and that's also going to be implementable, actionable, is also to make sure that you understand what does success mean, right? So what's the goalpost? In this case, the CEO has said, I want 20%, I want to double the percentage of my total revenues from 20 to 40%, right? But what does that really mean, right? Because there's a world where there's a portfolio of services, right? You have transactions, maybe you have savings, and let's say, and you have credit, right? Let's say today transactions make up 20%, savings make up 40%, credit makes up 40%. That's 100. It's important to be clear, and as I think about the problem definition, that the goal is not to then say, you know what, in quotes, kill the, or cut back on your savings services, or cut back on your credit services, and then that then shrinks, because automatically, right, if I take away, if I move my my savings or my credit business and I stop the business, right, and take it off the equation, overnight, right, my revenue could go to 40%, right, because I just took away a component of value, right? So as to think about the criteria for success, right, is to understand that the goal is that the other existing businesses, the revenues from those businesses should not be impacted, right? So that's very critical. So when you say you're doubling your revenues contribution from transactions, it's over and above the existing performance of the other businesses in the portfolio. Another element, right, is to then really understand what are the stakeholders involved, right? And also just more importantly, as I think about the solution, what are my sources of insight? Where do I learn from, right? Where do I get the data and information I need to be able to really solve the problem? Where do I go to get the right expertise and help to really solve the problem, right? And these are key elements that come together. So having set the context, right? So going back to the CEO's request, a good problem definition would read something like, what are the key actions that can be taken to grow transaction revenues as a percentage of total revenues from 20 to 40% over a 1-year period? Now, that's one way to phrase it. Another way to phrase it could be, what actions can be taken to grow my revenues from transactions, to double my revenues from transactions, right, without impacting revenues from other services in the next 1 year, right? But the important thing is that the problem definition hones in on what we're trying to solve, which is transactions revenue, doubling it over as a percentage of total revenues over 1 year. There's a common acronym that's usually used to capture the elements of a problem definition that works, right? And it's the SMART, S-M-A-R-T, right? So it needs to be simple, it needs to be measurable, it needs to be actionable, it needs to be realistic, and it needs to be time bound, right? And as we think about solving problems, it's important that as we think about the definition, it needs to meet those 5 criteria. I'll pause here to take to see if we have any questions, and then I'll then move on to the next step of the problem solving approach. So someone said here, is the context and aspiration akin to Aziz and to be? I think the way to think about it here is to really understand what the CEO is talking about, right? It's good to understand what the present is and what some of the factors that are influencing the present look like, and that's the context, right? So what's the now, but beyond the now is just what are the things that have gotten us to where we are today, right? And what's the situation, and then the aspiration is then the goal setting. So it's almost so it's not really to be. It's more like you're going to actively and deliberately shape the future by taking a set of actions, right? And the first thing is around the goalpost. So I think that's how to think about the aspiration. It's the mission statement. It's this is what we're going to go out there to achieve. So I think that's the only question I have here. So we will go on to the next step, and then so the second question here around, can we practice these 4 steps? And any problem we say, I would say that you typically can practice this across most, right? I wouldn't say all, but I would say most of any problem. It's thinking of it as a set of principles that when applied correctly will typically help to get to good insights and good reference base to take actions that are very fact-based, that could lead to the solutions that one desires, right? Cool. So I'll go on to the second element, right? And this is then, when you've defined the problem, right? What next, right? We said next is then to structure. Now, I'm going to talk about structuring. I'm going to go back to the analogy about the air conditioning, right? So you get home from work, your kid looks up to you and says, hey, daddy, the air conditioning system is not working. Now, to be able to solve and fix the problem, right, it's good to understand, just say, if the air conditioning is not working right, what could be driving it, right? And broadly speaking, there's something around, is power going in, right? Because there's no electricity, there's nothing you can do about it. The other one is then, if it's power and it's still not working, then is it mechanical, right? And it's almost like saying, so when I think about the problem, right, the element of my solution are there's something electrical, there's something mechanical. And then within electrical, right, it's almost like, is there power or is it just the AC not working? Within mechanical, is it something broken or is something, are we just, for example, have we just run out of gas, right? But the point here is that every problem has subcomponents that make up the whole. And so as we think about the problems we're trying to solve in the context of the clear problem definitions, it's important to break it down into the sub-elements, right? And 3 principles for distilling the elements of a problem, right? So the first one is around the sub-elements need to be very relevant to the question at hand, right? So I cannot say I'm trying to fix the AC, and then I start talking about, example, I need to call in a civil engineer, for example, right, to fix an air conditioning, right? Because it's highly unlikely that it's going to be a civil-related issue, right? So I'm calling in an accountant to do something about it, right? So it needs to be very relevant. The second thing is also the elements need to be consistent, right, with the problem. And then there's this phrase that's used a lot in consulting around MECE, right? So it means that the sub-elements of the problem need to be mutually exclusive, but collectively exhaustive, which basically means that each of the potential drivers or root causes of the problem need to add up, right? But then they also need to be independent of each other to enable you really then go into each of them to try and figure out if that is a real problem and to try to then address the issue. To bring this framework to life, right, let's apply it to the context of the problem that we are solving, right? So if you remember, we articulated the problem definition to read as what set of actions should be taken to grow transactions revenue as a share of the total revenues from 20% to 40% by December 2021, for example, right? So when you say, okay, so what really drives transaction revenues, right? What are the sub-elements of our problems? The 2 things that typically will drive your revenue, it's the volume and it's the price. So the question here is, are transactions revenue declining because our prices are declining? Are our transactions revenues declining because our volumes are declining, right? And as you think about these 2 broad elements, the component of both, right? It could be both, it could be one, it could be the other, right? But just being able to distill this, right, helps narrow down the focus of then trying to figure out what the challenge is, and then only then can you really then prefer a solution that works. Now, within the bucket of volumes, right, you then go, okay, what really drives my transaction volumes, right? And then there's something around customers need to go do transactions, right? So what actions can I take to really get my customers transacting, right, and grow my customer base? And then there's the other bit around, for customers to really transact, right, customers also need a point, an access point, which typically in this context, let's say is an agent network, right? So it means I need to also, could my volumes be because I need to expand the reach of my agent network to reach more customer base that can transact on my platform, right? And that's this, and there could be other things, right? For the context of this case, let's just pause at these 2. And then when I go to my pricing bucket, right, could it be that I can actually, one, just improve my margins, right? Because in this context, right, the price, usually when a customer pays, right, the agent gets a commission, the switch gets a piece of the money, and then ultimately the rest of it comes to you, right? So there's almost something around what can you do, right, from a pricing standpoint to improve your margins, right? So in a way, on the back end, increase the price, ultimate price that comes to you for the service rendered, right? And then there's a second bit around, if I can't do that, can I go to market, right, and just increase the price to the end user and the customer? And then that way I grow my margins, right, and get the price I need. Right, and then we can think of this as, these are like 4 sub-elements that can be addressed to really then begin to like grow transactions revenue. What you then do once you've been able to distill the components, right? For example, what the air conditioner technician would do is when it comes, it looks at the problem. Indoor, out, is it power or not? It goes to the power switch, puts it on, okay, there's power coming in, but it's not coming out. Is it an electrical indoor unit or is it an outdoor unit? And what he then does is he takes, for each of them, right, over the years of experience, right, he has learned what solution fits a challenge, right? So if I come into a house and the AC is not coming on because there's no power, I know I need to go to the generator and put on the power or get an inverter or some device. If there's power in the house and the AC is not coming on, I know it probably could be the switch or it could be the electrical control board that is bad. So for every subcomponent of the problem, there's a set of potential actions that can be taken to fix that sub-element, right? Which is why being able to structure a problem into its elements, you're able to then really hone into what am I solving for? And you can then pull the resources required to really then solve for it, right? So if I'm solving for growing the number of customers on my platform, for example, right, then I know that I need to do some form of marketing, right, to reach these people, right, and it could be below the line offers or above the line offers, right. But I just really need to engage potential customers and get them to try out my services. Another thing I can possibly do, right, if people are not using my platform, could be maybe they've had a bad experience. Maybe my system is usually down or whatever it is, right? And then you can say, okay, you know what? We're going to set all of the set of initiatives to fix our technical issues so that we always have system uptime. Or it could be that people just don't know that you're in the market and the people are not knowledgeable about the brand, right? And you're like, you know what? We're going to do an above the line marketing campaign, set up billboards, radio jingles, etc. So customers know about us and they can transact with us, right? And that's how to think about problem solving, right? So you need to know to collect detail what problem you're solving, what root cause you're addressing to really solve the broader problem, right? And that's what structure helps. I'm gonna pause here to see if we have any questions on structuring, but the overall principle here is that you need to be able to break down the problem definition into the sub-elements and then identify what the fix is for each of the solve or each of the problem elements, right? Or what the possible fixes are to each of the sub-problems that once addressed could lead to fixing the whole problem, right? So if it's the case of the air conditioning and the problem is you've run out of gas, then the solution is maybe there's a leak. If it's a leak, plug the leak. If you run out of gas and there's no leak, maybe it's just, it needs a refill, right? And that's how you then are able to begin to get the right solutions to fix underlying issues that have caused the problem to surface. So looking at the questions that we have, there's no question here, so I will move to the third piece. Cool. The third thing that we don't want to go to, right, is how do you prioritize? Now, I'm sure that this popular saying that some of us might have heard, right, about boiling the ocean, right? If you look at the slide before, right, we'd come up with 4 potential sub-problems. Each of the sub-problem has 3 actions that can be taken, right? So that's almost a set of 12 different actions to be done to try and solve the problem, right? But we know that we live in a world where resources are finite, where we're time bound, right? So it means, how do you figure out the best way to solve the problem in an efficient but yet effective way, right? And that's where the concept of prioritization comes in, right? And the way to think about prioritization is just going back to time-tested, trusted principles around the Pareto principle, right? So typically, right, when you do a normal distribution, right, you'll find out that it takes 20% of the effort, right, usually leads to about 80% of the impact. So the question is, when I look at all those big levers here, right, the question is, which 20% of the potential solutions can I really focus on that really will get me to really grow my revenue numbers, right? And how do you do this, right? The couple of ways to think about it, right? But I think it goes back to the basics around just practical judgment, right? Experience, and back of the envelopes, right? And the way to think about the matrix is almost, I didn't want to put too many frameworks in front of you, right? But it's simple 2x2 that looks at impact and the feasibility of getting the job done, right? So if I came to this slide around the issue tree, and we look at it and say, when I look at the problems, right, which of these levers will give me the most impact, and how feasible will it be to implement it, right? So I want to grow my customer base and all, right? How feasible is that, right? We know that usually, right, it's going to cost a lot to launch an aggressive above the line campaign because of just the cost of that, across the cost associated with that segment with that marketing tactic. And but still, right, it doesn't automatically translate into customers, right? So spend versus impact, right? If I decide to go and, for example, say I want to increase my margins on my bill per, etc., right? Will my other partners allow me to cut the prices to them, etc., right? And that's where experience, intuition, practical judgment, speaking to experts, speaking to people who are knowledgeable on the subject matter can help you prioritize what really counts. Right. So for example, going back to our air conditioner challenge, right? If it's a lay person, for example, if you ask me to go fix an air conditioner that's not working right, I will try to, even if I'm very scientific and I pull up a textbook, I pull up the manuals and all, I'm going to have a laundry list of, say, 20 activities I can take to solve it, or I Google how to fix an air conditioner. I'm going to have lots of options, right? But if I call in an experienced air conditioner tactician, he has done so many and seen so many scenarios that he can simply tell me, when you see the sign in your air conditioner, it's a sign that it's run out of gas. Or when you see this, right, it's a sign that the electrical panel is broken, right? And that's where the richness or the robustness, right, of problem solving comes in, right? It's being able to look at what are the dimensions of my problem, and from a quick leveraging experience and practical judgment, you're able to say, okay, and it's very hypothesis based, right? It's intuition, guesswork, whatever you call it, right? But it's coming from a reference point of experience and leveraging what exists and what's obtainable. And you say, okay, you know what? I think that two things here will help me achieve my objective, right? So, for example, let's say that very practically, right? You're like, okay, I want to grow my revenues 2x, right, from transactions. The fastest and smartest way, right, to really do it is I just need to get agents in communities where customer base exists already, right, but I don't have a presence, right? So if I'm able to deploy access points, people need to cash in, cash out. People will always move money around. So if I can just get my terminals, my access points closer to them through the agents, they will grow. My revenues will grow, right? And that's very 80-20. The second thing is around, okay, there's also a world where if I can get to customer bases that are unreached, right? Because people value access over price, right? They just want to be able to get their money. It costs so much to travel to where the banks are, etc. I can afford to charge a premium for that extra convenience I'm providing to them, right? And then your hypothesis could be, okay, to double my revenue in the next 1 year, two quick things I can do to solve the problem. Let's grow our agent network to new geographies. Let's also try and apply a premium to our pricing, right? And then that then becomes the hypothesis, right? And based on that, right, you can then deprioritize actions around growing the direct customer base through marketing initiatives and system reliability. You can prioritize the parts of the dimensions of going to your partners and trying to have procurement negotiations that could hurt your relationships with them, etc. Right? And that's how you prioritize. And then what you then do, right, is then to say, okay, if I want to grow my agent network, like what can I do here, right? I need a set of field sales agents. Do I have them? Yes, I have people on my payroll already that I can deploy to other geographies to recruit agents. Now you're going from the problem to the solution space, right? To figuring out within your network of influence, within your existing resources, right? What is the most, what do I have that can solve this problem? I have sales agents. I can send them to find me agents. I can work on the incentives for the agents, right? I could give them additional commissions. I could give them promotional materials to get the agents excited and willing to join my network. I can set up very easy dispute reputations that build trust and credibility for those people. And in that way, you come up with a set of initiatives that will enable you grow your network agent, that will then translate into increased volumes, that will then get you to get into your revenue aspirations. And that's how to think about it. Very similar also when it comes to the cash and cash, your pricing, right? Is okay, increase your prices, right, to end users, and then it gets you there. I'm mindful of time, so I'll just look through the questions to see if we have any questions here, and then we'll make progress. So there's a question here around what is the process for developing an issue tree? Is it done by consultants alone or through brainstorming sessions with company team? And then a second one around how do you know when you have gotten elements that fit the MECE criteria? In other words, how do you know when there's no other element that can be missed? I think starting from the second question, right? I think the way to think about it is problem solving, right? Is very iterative, right? You probably won't get it right the first time, but as you go to try to approach, you continue to refine your hypothesis, the elements, right? So you learn new things as you get into your hands dirty in that sense, to get your hands into trying to fix the problem. As you learn new things, you always go back to the framework, to the different elements, and you refine it, right? So that's how to think about it. A good way to start is just say, what are all the things I think are the problem? Group them into clusters that have similar themes and connections, so that way similar problematic themes are clustered together and can be addressed together. On the question around, do you need a consultant? I think no, right? You don't need a consultant to do this, right? But consultants are experienced and trained in trying to do this, which is the value add that they bring. But once you understand the principle and start to apply it, you master it, right? And it becomes subconscious to you as you go about your day-to-day activities. Cool. And then going on to the last element of problem solving, right, is, so you've tried to figure out how to solve the problem, right? You've called a strategy session, you've run the numbers, you've built a model to say, overall, we have 200 sales agents. To be effective, right? One sales agent recruits about 10 agents in a month. To be able to grow my agent network to 1,000, then I need to make sure that I have 100 agents recruiting 10 agents a month. Do I send all those people to Ibadan? Do I send them to Abuja? Do I send them to Ghana, etc., right? And then you do all that, right? And you say, okay, if I send them and they hit their targets and their targets translate to this revenue, then I get to my answer, right? And then you gather all those facts and all. When you do all that, right, to sell to the CEO and to get buy-in from the CEO that you've been able to solve the problem, there's a huge, and to gain credibility and clarity as to the approach to get into the solution, it's very important to be able to piece. Remember, we deconstructed the problem to try to find the solutions. Once you find the solutions, you then reconstruct it so that the answer is whole, it's simple, and it's actionable, right? It's very clear what the actions are, and it's also clear what the potential impact of the potential impact of the actions, what those will be. And the way to just help everyone visualize it, right, and really understand this is so a couple of facts, right? So, and that's usually what happens with problem solving, right? You know a little here, a little there, a little there, but it doesn't really come together, right? So I've misplaced my keys. Where's my passport? Oops, 2 months late on my taxes, right? Like, these are all facts, but what do they mean, right? And I think here, what I also wanted to show here is the difference between summary and synthesis, right? Summary is almost telling the facts in very clear, understandable words, right? So I've lost my keys and my passport, and I am behind on my tax returns, right? But when it comes to problem solving, right, it's not just about telling the data in better English or in better ways, but it's more around what's the insight here, what's the call to action, right? And the synthesis of all the facts to look at basically means that, hey, dude, you're scattered. Something is driving it. What could it be, right? Maybe you need a break. You're scattered, right? What could be driving it? Maybe you need an assistant. You're scattered, right? Because when you're able to distill what the so what is, right? Then the action is very clear to know what action to take, right? So in the context of our case, right, what will a possible synthesis look like, right? And here I try to write it down in communication text, right? But it's almost great. There are two strategic actions that are required to be taken over the next 1 year. Number one is increase the agent network coverage, right? Why is that? If you do this, it's going to lead to 15% total revenue contribution, right? Remember, we're trying to get incremental 20%. So if I increase it, I get 15% of the 20% I'm looking for. Now, what is the rationale that builds that enables us to get to that conclusion, right? And this is where we put the facts in, right? So before the facts is the synthesis. The synthesis is to fix your problem, get the agent network on, right? Because if you get the agent network on, it gives you 15%. What are the facts? Based on what you have, right? If you're able to increase the number of agents that you have currently by 50%, you get 10%, right? And that's based on your transaction volumes and the average revenue per agent. Second thing is, this is very possible, right? Because you already have the sales team, right, to do this, right? So just get your agents that you need. The third thing is then around, you can also get additional 5%, right, by just incentivizing your existing agent, and they will get you additional volumes, right? So just give them a little incentive in terms of their compensation, for example, or their commissions, and they will use their word of mouth to get to the transactions you need to really grow your volumes. Second thing is then to meet up with the remaining 5% of incremental revenue that we're looking for. We're saying that increase your prices, right? If you increase your prices on cash and cash out transactions, you're going to get approximately 4% of the revenue that you're looking for. And then if you do a much more vendor-based approach, right? So let's say you have a switch A that you're paying 10 Naira for, right? And switch B is trying to lure you, and switch B says, you know what, come on board for 8 Naira, right? So your margins increase, right? And that could lead to the incremental pricing that you're trying to get, right? And collectively, these facts, right, add up to the strategic pillars or priorities that, based on the data and hypothesis, can get you to your aspiration, right? And this overall, right, he's also think about applying the 4-step approach to a business problem that in a way could be challenging or daunting, but when broken down into the elements and addressed, that could actually be very clear guidelines and roadmaps to actually achieving goals and objectives. On this note, I'm going to pause. I'm above my time, so I'll see if we have any questions here, and then I will hand back to Olamide. All right, so there's a question here around what are the specific skills needed to improve your problem-solving skills, right? And I think the good thing about problem solving is, there's this overall debate about, is it an art, is it a science, etc. I think it's a mixture of both, right? I think one is frameworks help because they guide and help to shape the thinking in a structured way. And then, but beyond the framework, right, there's then the part of just pragmatism, there's the part of experience, there's the part of curiosity, there's the part of just asking for help, right? To then really get to the problem. And if you're able to imbibe this disciplines and habits and becomes a way of life, then everyone, right, can potentially be great at problem solving, but it's knowing what the principles are, and then it's honing the skills and just practicing, and you get better. Yes, so that will be my answer to that question. On this note, I will stop and hand the floor back to Olamide. Thank you very much. If there are any other questions, I'll be here and I'm happy to take the questions.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much, Olayinka. That was an extremely insightful session and a really great framework that we can apply to almost any issues in our worlds. So I see there's a couple of questions in the Q&A box. And if you switch to the next slide, I think the next slide is for questions in general. So if there's any additional questions that anyone on the line has, again, if it's questions related to the case or if it's questions related to the framework, problem solving in general, and also questions related to Olayinka's experience, career tips or anything like that, please do ask and we'll take them as they come. Olayinka, I do see a couple here that came in recently. So there's one from Ogechi that says, I don't quite get the difference between synthesis and summary. Can you please take it again?
Okay. Cool. Yes, I think of summary as presenting the facts in a very clear, easy to understand way, right? So if I was going to give the summary of an essay, for example, right? So I'm trying to look for a popular book that lots of folks may or may not have read, right? So I was going to talk about, okay, I might be wrong here, but let me put a stake in the ground, right? Chiamanda's book, right? Let's say Half a Yellow Sun. I don't know if I've read it, right? But it probably would go and say, okay, it was a good summary would be, there was the family, the book talks about the family during the Nigerian Civil War, how, and like the facts around the story. Maybe this is not the best analogy. And then, okay, let me look for a much more straightforward thing. So a summary tells all that you know it's an abridged version of the facts, right? Telling all that you know in clearer, fewer words. A synthesis is implications focused, right? So what is the so what? So you've told me, so there's overall there's this coronavirus in globally, there's the epidemic globally. As a result, there've been economic lockdowns. People have been asked to stay at home, and the healthcare systems are stretched and etc. Right? So that's trying to summarize the situation. The so what of that would be, one is a recession is imminent. That's the so what. And then you can then go, a recession is imminent because the economies are on a lockdown, businesses are not opening, people are not making income, consuming power is declining, governments don't have sources of income and cannot meet their obligations, there's going to be fiscal gaps, etc., right? But the so what, right, the synthesis of the impact of the lockdown would be a recession is imminent. A summary of the lockdown would be, overall there's a lockdown because of, there's a virus, etc. But the synthesis looks beyond the facts of the immediate and tells you what the implications are of the facts. I hope that helps.
So there's quite a number of questions and we can run through them as time permits. There's another one here from Babatola Ojo. In a situation where the CEO doesn't give you 100% chance to operate, then what do you do?
Cool, right. And I think this goes back to the problem definition, right? Around elements of the problem definition. So in defining your problem, you need to be mindful of your context, your solution space, the scope of the answer and who your stakeholders are that you need your buy-in, right? So in this case of this problem, right, your primary stakeholder, for example, is the CEO, right? He's the one that has called you in and has told you to help solve the problem. And as you start solving the problem, right, it then becomes very important that you need alignment with the CEO. If he's telling you to do stuff, then you need his buy-in. You need to make sure that as you define your problem, it makes sense to him. And if he has reservations, you need to talk about it, right? To agree on what it is, right, that you want to do. So an example could be you go to the CEO, he's like, grow transaction volume. And then he tells you nothing must happen to the other volumes, right? So whatever solution you do, there cannot be cannibalization. So if you're doing a problem, you're solving the problem and then there's cannibalization of services in your solution, you don't have the buy-in of the CEO, right? Which is why it's important to really understand what the stakeholders want. A quick other context would be, in this case, right, your head of growth or your head of sales is a very important stakeholder because the recommendations that you're given fall on his plate. That's going to be the guy's call to duty, right? So you need to make sure that the guy understands the process, and more importantly, you have this head of sales' buy-in for him to take on the responsibility of doubling the company's revenue over the next 1 year. Because the guy could be like, who is this consultant? You want to chase me out of the job, right? So as you define the problem, it's beyond just a question. It's more around what is the context? What is the solution space? What is the criteria for success? What is the scope of my solutions? Who are the stakeholders I need to pull into, right? And the whole of that make up the problem you're trying to solve, right? So part of the problem could be, I need to engage with the head of sales to make sure he's carried along and gets his buy-in. That's within your problem definition. I hope that helps.
There are two questions here. I'll just quickly tie them together. One, would this deck be available afterwards? Yes, we can send this out, Olayinka, if that's fine, to all participants. And they also want to know how we can get in touch with you, how anyone can get in touch with you after this.
So I think you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and happy to connect afterwards.
All right, there's a question here from Ifeanyi. Revenue is price times volume. My question is, how do you unpack the components of the price and volume? What questions do you ask?
Right, so I think when it comes to volume, right, he's then saying, what drives my volumes, right? So usually your volumes might come through sales channels, or your volume might come through your product portfolio mix, or might come through like a geography sales, right? It's then understanding in the context of the industry or the problem, what really drives your volumes, and then going and breaking that down into the subcomponents that drive volumes in that context. Cool.
A few more. There's quite a number of questions, so we'll just take, let's say, two more before we wrap up. I like this one. How will you advise a consultant starting out?
Good question, right? And the way I like to think about it, right, when I think of one of the things I learned, right, is the job of the consultant, really, right? You're not the solution provider, right? I think the way to think about it is your job is to help your clients, right, collaboratively help address their most pressing issues, right? So it's more a heart of how can I best be of help to my client, right? And that then comes from acquiring and focusing on building the requisite toolkits to be able to be of valuable to them in terms of a thought partner. So how do you structure problems? How do you think through problems? How do you leverage expertise and bring in the right experts to help think through the problem? But the heart is, think of yourself as a help to the clients. And as a result of the help you need to provide, you need to make sure that you build the required skill set around problem solving, communication, being able to run analysis, being able to leverage an expert network, etc. And then focus on building the toolkits that will enable you help support the clients where they need the help the most. But don't think of yourself as the one that has to have the answer. Just think of yourself as a partner, a thought partner, and a support that can help the clients go through the process together.
Okay, and these last questions go hand in hand, so we can knock out these two together. There's a current learner. He's doing an MBA on sustainability, or in sustainability, excuse me, at Nexford, and would like to know what opportunities are out there for this field in consulting. And the second question is around education. So what role has your own education played in acquiring skills and competencies for problem solving?
Great. So I think both questions are connected, right? I think in consulting, right, and if you come into the industry, you'll find people from all backgrounds, right? From people that studied music to folks that studied engineering to folks that studied accounting, economics, etc., right? And I think what you would find is beneath all of this, right, is just I don't want, for lack of a better word, right, a knack, right, for wanting to help solve problems and to deliver value, right? I think it's that curiosity and that commitment, right, to work as a team, to solve problems, to that entrepreneurial mindset, to look for opportunities, to really go out of your way to support others. I think that's what makes great consultants, right? And that's what will then drive you to build all the toolkits and things that are required. On the second question around education, right, I think very similarly is, on my part, I have an engineering background, right, and which I think helps from just being probably more analytical minded, right, from that trade. And then I have an MBA where I've learned, but I think the bulk of my learning has just come from, it's more of an apprenticeship, right? The more you do, the more you master the art and the tricks. And you get better, and you also build a network of support. So that's how I would think about the learning journey, right? It's an apprenticeship, and you just continue to apply yourself to it every day, and you get better.
All right, thank you, Olayinka, for helping us answer those questions. I'm sorry if we weren't able to answer your question that was posted. We will make this recording available to all participants as well as the deck. Olayinka said we can add him on LinkedIn. So if you type in Olayinka Majekodunmi, you can find him there. And if you'd like to contact him there as well, you can. Olayinka, do you mind moving to the next slide so I can wrap up? Permit me with just taking another minute of our time to close out. Okay, so Olayinka has successfully completed the second webinar in our series. For those who were able to join, thank you. And for those who had joined the Sterling one as well, we do have 3 more webinars coming up. In this particular series, there's one with the chairman of the board at MTN coming up on Monday, and then the 2 others thereafter on Tuesday and Wednesday. So if you'd like to register for any of these, please visit nexford.org/webinar-series. And Yinka, if you could hit the next slide, let me just cover this last 2. So if you'd like to join us, if you're not a current learner and you'd like to apply, please visit nexford.org to complete your application today. And the next slide as well, is my little announcement that I wanted to make, is that we'll be giving out 45 gigabytes worth of data to any new joiners coming in during this period, because we understand that everyone is, staying safe at home, consuming more data, and we would like to improve and support in terms of access to your education. So to gain access to this, please go to nexford.org/MTN. And with that brings our webinar to a close. Again, thank you so much, Olayinka, for giving us this time, giving us this opportunity to learn from you. It's been extremely insightful. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate your commitment to supporting learners and professionals in the field. Would you like to say any closing remarks?
I think it's just thank you for the opportunity. I've had a good time, and I hope that the audience also did learn a few things here. So thank you so much, Olamido and the Nexford team, for having me.
All right, thank you so much, Yinka, and thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.